Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unsubscribe, the demandDrive podcast. I am your host, AJ Alonso. I've got my co-host with me today, Alex Ellison. How you doing, Alex?
I'm good. Ever since you forgot to introduce me that one time, I'm just happy every time you remember me. So I'm
I'm
I'm having a great day.
I'm glad that you'll never forget that because I need to be better, and I need you to remind me to be better every single day.
I won't.
Okay. All right. It's not just us bantering, though. We've got a fantastic guest with us today, Scott Bonish, project lead here at demandDrive and recent flag football champion, probably the most notable accomplishment of the guy's career so far. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing well, AJ. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Of course. We're happy to have you here because we're going to be talking about personal goal setting today, a topic that we've brought up internally somewhat recently. And Scott, based on your, I guess, like career trajectory here at demandDrive, we figured you'd be a great person to pick your brain, sort of give your experience on the topic and give some insight to our audience in terms of how to set personal goals, why they're so important, things of that nature. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm pumped to get into it. And I want to start the conversation off by getting real broad, like broad strokes, 30,000 foot view, start at the top. Why should you set personal goals? How do you go about it? What does your goal setting process look like? Give everyone sort of like the personal goal setting 101.
Yes, definitely. I can talk about that a bit. So I think it's always good to, when you're setting goals, start small. So you want to start with some micro goals that can turn into macro goals in the long run. And, it also, you want to hold yourself accountable. So if you give yourself deadlines, that's something that I use to set goals. In terms of personal goals, there are work personal goals, there's out of work personal goals. Both are important. In terms of work goals, I think same as what I said previously, starting with smaller goals. So in sales, and sort of specifically with a role like SDR, if you start with some smaller goals that are more easily attainable, such as activity-based goals, you can then move on to, as you gain experience in the role, you can then move on to more productivity goals, such as leads and meetings booked, revenue closed won, stuff like that. So, it starts small with activities, and then you build up to, having your deals close. So I think
like
that is, yep.
It's important, I think, yeah, because realistically in our audience, I don't know where you are in your career, but a lot of the people that we talk to, a lot of the people internally here at demandDrive, this might be their first ever professional job, right? Being an SDR, it's sort of your stepping stone into whatever the corporate career you're taking looks like. And for a lot of people, that means that professional goal setting, a personal level, but like in a professional setting, it's the first time they've ever done that. So it can get overwhelming, so to speak, when it comes to like, hey, if your goal is, I don't know, 8 meetings booked this month, being able to think micro to macro and go like, all right, if I have to book 8 meetings, what does it mean to get there? How many activities do I have to put in? How many calls is that? Even breaking it down like by the day, by the hour, so that you can really understand like the stepping stones that you're building to get to that much larger goal. Because I've seen it, I know you've probably seen it as well, Scott. People who do get overwhelmed and that sort of like overtakes their ability to actually perform the job.
Completely agree. And something that you said that I do as well, that I really, focus on, is breaking the goals down into smaller, like periods of time. So if you know, in that example you gave, where if your goal is 8 leads per month, that's 2 a week. So then that's one every 2.5 days. So you can kind of break it down that way, where it's easier to track how you're doing. And I think that's something that's very important, because then you know if you're getting a little behind, or vice versa. If you're on pace to crush your goal, you can tell that too. So
Yeah,
I think breaking it down was definitely a great idea.
yeah, and I always liked breaking down my goals for a similar reason, but just the fact that like if you get behind, you can say, "All right, I need to, make this many more calls to just get back on pace." Whereas if you're like, "All right, I only have 2 leads this month. I need to get 6 this week," like I'm behind. That's daunting. But if you're like, "Okay, well, if I make, I don't know, 40 dials a day this week, the math proves out that like I can get those 6 leads." That's a lot easier to just wrap your head around. And I know for me, a lot of the goal setting, like if I set a goal that's too big, I just won't start something. Whereas, like, if you set it big, but then you break it down, it's much easier to say, all right, today I'm going to do this little bit, and then a little bit tomorrow, a little bit the next day, and move forward. So I think beyond just helping sort of you structure your goal, it really helps when you get off pace, really in one direction or the other, to sort of get back on track with by breaking it down like that.
Definitely. And the goals can feel more attainable that way, as well, as you're, breaking them down into smaller goals.
Yeah. So sort of a follow-up question on that. And, especially when we're talking about whether or not we're creating attainable goals, are the goals you set for yourself set in stone, or like at what point do you say, hey, this goal didn't quite work, like these things aren't going to happen, let me readjust, versus saying like, let me just put my head down and get through this, I know I'm behind, but it should be fine? How do you kind of like decide when to make those changes?
So, good question. I think that goals should definitely be fluid. The end goal sort of stays the same, but how you go about achieving that you can stay fluid with. You can sort of, and it kind of goes back to what we were saying, but you can break things down, and it's easier when you're keeping goals fluid, because you're just trying to accomplish your micro goals, and then get to the macro goal.
We've been talking a lot about, I guess, like personal goals and like the work setting. Do you take that same approach when it comes to like non-work based personal goals? Like if you're, I don't know, if you have a goal to like buy a house, for example, do you still go from like macro, micro, macro, and then keeping the things like the micro portions of that goal fluid? Do you, like basically taking the same process that you do for work and kind of transferring it to your personal life?
Yeah. So just to sort of use that example you just referenced, it is a goal of mine to buy a house. So
I had no idea. I promise.
well, isn't it everybody's goal to eventually? So it's something that, I'm not just going to wake up one day and be able to buy a house. So it's something that you have to put the work in, you have to remain focused. I think focus is a huge part of it as well, because if you start to lose focus, you're not thinking about the goal as much, where it's kind of always good to have that end goal in the back of your mind. Not that it has to inform everything that you're doing, but it's good to, constantly be thinking about it, be reevaluating. And that kind of goes into what we were talking about, keeping the goals fluid. I think, constantly evaluating and reevaluating where you are, and, just being realistic and pragmatic with yourself. It helps you keep yourself honest about the goal that way.
Yeah, I think like pragmatism maybe even like self-awareness really is sort of like
Yep.
one of the most crucial parts of this, right? Because you can have the best intention in the world of either purchasing a home or getting 8 leads in a month, and even do the work of breaking it down by like whatever, by the day, by the hour. But if you're not going to like actually follow through on that, or if you get distracted easily, or if you don't hold yourself, you had mentioned it before, if you don't hold yourself accountable to doing the things that you've laid out, then you've just built a framework that you can't actually follow through on. And that's not valuable for you. It's not valuable for your organization. If you are trying to book 8 meetings, like they can say, hey, great job putting this together, but like, where's the execution, right? So having all of that doesn't necessarily make up for the fact that if you don't have focus, self-awareness to like actually follow through with it, it's not going to work.
Right. It what you were just saying reminded me of an old quote, the best laid plans of mice and men go oft awry. So it's like you can have a plan and a goal in mind, but if you're not focused on that, if you're not realistic about it, if you're not reevaluating, then it can just fall by the wayside. And, at that point, it could just become a failed goal. So,
Yeah. And I think, and we can dive more into this in a bit if you want, but talking about like the execution of some of these goals and the self-awareness and combining those is really important, because I know like everyone's different, right? Everyone's got their own way to set goals. There are some SDRs here who like, you look at their calendar and it looks like they're busy every minute of every day of every week. And it's just because they're like, well, I'm not going to call people unless my calendar says call block. I'm not going to do any account mapping unless my calendar says account mapping. And that works really well for them. The counterpoint, like when I was an SDR, I never did that. I tried, I think, for a week, and I was like, oh, it would like say call. It would say like set an hour for calling, and I'd be like, I can knock out that amount of calls in half an hour, and then I just like not do it for half an hour, and then like try and catch up. It was a mess. It wasn't how I'm good at keeping myself accountable, but it took that trial and error to find out. So. I don't know if you guys have any other strategies other than what I sort of just described, but like things an SDR, a new SDR today could like take and like try, see if it helps them focus and hit those goals, or if it's just not the strategy for them.
yeah, I mean, I would have to agree about the calendar thing. I keep track of specific things on my calendar, obviously any important meetings, but it's never been beneficial for me, in my opinion, to make sure I have every single minute of every single day structured. I mean, things happen in a day, so you need to know how to deal with some unstructured events. So I think, I do have like a general structure that I do. I personally prefer to do a lot of account mapping and some emails in the morning and then hit the phones in the afternoon. I'm also supporting the central time zone and the West Coast. So to me, it was kind of like there's not a great point in calling people super early. So, I'm using that time when the prospects might not even be at work yet to get some more of the administrative stuff done, and then can focus on my outreach at a later point.
Yeah, I really like that. And I adopted a similar strategy when I was an SDR. We talked about it in a separate podcast and maybe opt-in about that kind of bleeds into like time management, right? Like setting goals for yourself based on the agenda that you have. They go hand in hand. I think the quote that we used was use evidence to set an effective agenda. I think that's like a really compelling thing to think about as a rep, where if you know that people aren't in the office early in the morning because you support a territory that's an hour or 3 behind, like that's a great opportunity to account map and sort of set yourself up like you do, Scott. Whereas like if it's the opposite and you're calling into the East Coast and maybe at like 4 p.m. people kind of take off for the day, then you know that you can kind of bookend your day and do that research for the next day at the end of the day instead. It all kind of depends on like how you like to work and how you set yourself up. But Alex, to answer the question that you had, one of the things that I think is so important for reps to do, and Scott, you probably see this on a regular basis as a project lead of someone who's like sort of directly managing other SDRs here, is building in public. I think if you tell yourself, like, I need to make at least 40 dials a day to hit the goals that I have for myself on a macro level, it's one thing to tell yourself that and to follow through with it or not, but it's another thing to like tell your manager and tell the other people on your team, like, hey, I have to make 40 dials today. Don't let me not make 40 dials today. If it means that I have to skip a team sync because I'm behind on dials, or if it means that we had like an account mapping workshop set up and I have to push that or whatever because I have to get these dials in, recognize that like I'm not doing it because I'm shirking those responsibilities. I'm doing it because that I know I have to hit these dials. And so from like a peer perspective, you can sort of motivate and encourage your peers to do that. But from a manager perspective on your side of things, Scott, like it's important for you to know that your reps know that, right?
Definitely. One of the biggest things that I do and that I encourage the team to do to hold themselves accountable to goals is to just talk about them with each other. And, not even talking about just work goals right now. If you have other goals, like personal goals outside of work, talk about them with your friends, talk about them with your partner. The more you talk about it, the more you'll be able to hold yourself accountable, but there will also be someone else that might be able to be there for you to help you hold yourself accountable. I think talking about things in terms of goal setting is incredibly important. And something else that I do that, like, a little old fashioned with all the technology we have, but I write everything down. I write down my personal goals, my work goals. I reevaluate on, weekly to monthly to quarterly basis, and it's all written down. So, at the beginning of every month, I'll write down a few things that I need to get done. At the beginning of every week, I'll write down a few things to get done. And these can range from goals that are easy to attain to goals that are a little harder. I think that you can start with some of the easier goals, and then just being able to check off or cross out a goal that you achieved sort of motivates you to then move on to the next one.
Yeah, I really like that. To jump back for a second to what you're saying about talking to people about it, because I struggle with this with my own sort of goal setting and things, is even when they're going poorly, you still want to talk to them about it. It's really easy to be like, hey, Scott, this is the goal I've set. I want to get this many leads this month. And then, I'm not on pace. I'm not going to bring it up in my one-on-one. Like, if I don't talk about it, maybe he'll forget about it, and then we just won't have that goal anymore, right? And then I won't fail, which is like not a good, like, when I put it that way, it's obviously a bad mindset, but it's so easy to fall into that trap to be like, well, I don't want to have a bad one-on-one, so like we'll just talk about sports for 25 minutes, and I'll be like, hey, look at this one lead I got, and then time's up.
But it's a really personal example, Alex.
That's why I said Scott as my manager, even though AJ, you're actually my manager. But I just wanted to make that clear, because even as you were saying that, I was like, oh yeah, I probably should bring up some goals that I do want support on and do want help on, but it's a lot easier it's easier as an individual to just be like, no, I'll figure it out myself and ignore it. But in the long run, that's detrimental to your own growth, to the company's growth, to your team's goals, and all sorts of things that you really want to be able to make sure you're contributing positively to.
Definitely. And, especially here at a place like demandDrive, where you have, a ton of SDRs and SDR managers that you can lean on. I've had people I can remember one specific person that reached out to me completely out of the blue, had never even talked to this guy. And he just needed some help to keep up with his goals. He was like, I've seen you ringing the bell. I know. And this was back when I was a team lead, just a team lead. He just asked for some help, and I was happy to, hop on a quick call with him, give him some tips, and, he's still here doing well today. So, I'd like to think that he took some of that to heart, and, that I helped him a little with his goal setting.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Your support
There's
system doesn't want to see you fail.
Yeah.
Right.
That nobody wants to see that. I think people are like, there's a huge fear of failure,
Mhm.
right? Like you don't want to see yourself fail. Nobody else wants to see you fail. But at the same time, failure is valuable in that you learn something from it. And Scott, to your point, even if you don't work at a company as great as demandDrive, but you just have a team of like maybe 2 or 3 other SDRs and a manager, or even if it's just you and a manager, or even if it's just you, there are communities out there. There are other colleagues you have. There are people in other departments that you can leverage when it comes to, hey, I had a goal set to hit 8 meetings this month. I only got 6. Either A, I see you ringing the bell all the time. How are you doing it? Let me learn from you. Or, I didn't hit my goal. Or have you ever been in my shoes? What are some resources that you were able to leverage to maybe move up and out of the SDR position to get into your spot at the company? That anything you're doing that might be able to help me in some capacity. If you fail, it's not an opportunity for you to just, like Alex was saying, never talk about it again and hope the goal just disappears. It's an opportunity for you to evaluate, like, was this goal too difficult? Was I not doing enough? Is my manager expecting too much of me? Do I have the right resources in place? Like going through all of that and figuring out whether or not you could or can hit it, and then going from there. It's just so much more valuable than giving up.
Certainly. Something you just said sort of reminded me of when I first started here. I didn't know anybody. I started and everybody was remote, and there were a couple things that I kind of just reached out to a few friends from outside the company who I knew were successful in sales, and just picked their brains about a few things. Just about some of my outreach, some of the cadences, things like that. So, and that even just ties back to what we were saying about voicing your goals and talking about them. So, never a shortage of people that you can talk about your goals with.
Yeah. And especially if we're talking about, SDRs are really in the business of building rapport with people. At the very least, reaching out to someone on LinkedIn or connecting with someone that's not a prospect, at the very least, will be helpful in your ability to figure out how people work, what kinds of conversations people have that you can even just take, back to the SDR world with you. So I think there are a lot of those skills that I don't even want to say translatable because you're still in the same role, but the stuff, dealing with rejection, dealing with failure, and facing it head on, talking to people, building rapport with people. These are skills that are so essential to success in the SDR role that are also super helpful and super vital to being successful with really whatever goals you're setting. So I think, there's definitely areas where in training, you can be like, oh, that makes sense as an SDR. If you can see that and take it and use it to help yourself set and accomplish goals, you can go a really long way.
Love that. I want to shift focus a little bit and go back to something that we had very lightly touched on in regards to motivation, essentially. So you have goals that you've set for yourself. You know that you have to hit them because it impacts the company's bottom line, or you're responsible for X amount of pipeline revenue as an SDR, or you want a roof over your head, so you want to buy a house. There's the motivation of hitting the goal because it's a goal that you have set for yourself, but leading up to that on outside of the broad strokes, we've gone, macro, micro, thinking micro again. What are you doing on a regular basis to motivate yourself to hit that larger goal? And then thinking about we kind of touched on it, but like what happens when you do, what happens when you don't? Like, how do you kind of treat yourself in that scenario?
So I think that for this, I think in general, people have an idea of what motivates them in their personal lives. So then you can try to transfer that over to your work. So if, if you are somebody who rewards yourself for accomplishing a goal, then in your personal life, then transfer that same thing to your work life and reward yourself when you accomplish a goal. Further, it kind of, and it depends on the goal, depends on the scenario. We talked about how goals should be fluid, but checking in with yourself and making sure the goals are making you feel good. If you set an unattainable goal and then you're struggling to achieve it, it can be demotivating in a way. So, and this kind of circles back to one of the things we were talking about earlier in just being pragmatic with yourself, setting realistic goals and just keeping up with them that way. That's definitely a big thing in terms of staying motivated because it's attainable.
Mm-hmm.
How do you like motivate yourself? Sorry, Alex, let you ask your question, but I'm wondering, like, Scott, you right now today, like, let's say you set a goal for the next hour, you want to make 35 dials. I don't know, totally random. And let's say you hit it. Like, what would you do to like reward yourself or like motivate yourself to positive reinforcement that's part of a larger scheme of things that you're doing to hit a much more broad goal, but like you make those 35 dials? What do you do?
So for me, I like to take a small break or two in each day. So if I accomplish a goal like the one you just laid out, I might take my dog for like a 15-minute walk. Just get out of the house. I think that especially with a goal like that, where it can be, in terms of calls and activities, like calling can be pretty repetitive. You might not get as many pickups as you hope for. So I think, just being able to step outside, get, sort of reset your brain after, monotonous, a monotonous hour or so. And then that's something I like to do. Maybe if it's poor weather and you can't do that, maybe you have a good snack that you like, things like that.
I think someone internally, I asked him this question, or it was brought up during the symposium, and he was like, yeah, I have victory cupcakes. And I'm like, victory cupcakes? And she's like, yeah, just have cupcakes on standby so that when I accomplish something, I get to eat a cupcake. Like, genius.
I think that was Andrew.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Oh my God. All right. So you talked about setting an attainable goal and what happens if you set one too hard. I'm curious about what happens if you set a goal that's too easy, right? It is attainable. You reached it. How do you know if the goals you're setting are too easy? Is it something you just have to kind of feel out for yourself, or what do you do there?
I definitely think it's something you have to feel out, but at the same time, I'm somebody that I make personal daily lists like the night before. So the first thing on my daily list every day is wake up early, walk the dog, eat breakfast, and have coffee.
Eat coffee.
So, no.
Just
Eat
get the
breakfast, drink
grounds,
coffee.
Drink breakfast and eat coffee.
So it's just like every day I don't even really have to think about it, but I'm doing those things. So it's like a nice, easy goal, and I'm starting my day off positively. So then you start the day off positively, you kind of, you're feeling good. That's like, I definitely like to start a day or a week with an easy goal. And then work up to the tougher goals. Like, as a SDR, we talk about monthly goals. So, maybe in the first week of the month, you just want to get a lead or two, but later in the month, depending on how you're doing, you might be like, oh wow, I need three leads this week to hit my goal. So you ramp things up a bit, and you accomplish your goals that way. You don't want every goal to be too easy, because then you're just accomplishing everything, and
sounds like a win to me. I don't know.
I love accomplishing everything.
Talk me out of it.
But you can't. Your goals can't be like, drink a cup of water, like something like that, because you're just going to do that without even thinking. So I think, as long as you're putting some thought into it, and keeping yourself honest about things, like you said right when you asked this question, like, it's something you just got to work through a little, figure out what works for you.
What about when you do set a goal that you think is attainable, and it is, after you're kind of like working towards it, you realize that it is maybe a little bit ambitious, and you don't hit it? How do you know whether or not it's because the goal was too ambitious, or you're, for lack of a better phrase, I guess, like not trying hard enough?
Speaking specifically, to the SDR role, that a goal like that is something that you can always look back at the metrics for. So if you set a lofty goal, but then you look back at the metrics and you're not making enough dials or emails, then in that case, it's probably on you. If you set, like, if you're in a goal setting process and early on you set what you think might be a tougher goal, it's just something that you kind of know that you have to work harder for. So it's, something, being self-aware, and just being able to know that you have what it takes to get the goal. It just, there might be mental blocks, there might be whatever obstacles in the way is, you can overcome them, basically. Like, you knew that up front when you set a lofty-ish goal. So as long as you're putting in the work, I think that you're putting in the work, you're checking the metrics, you're making sure that everything is as it is, then you're good to go. Sales specifically can be fairly cyclical. So if you're, peaks and valleys, you might have a great month, you might have a poor month right after. So it's just, I think a big thing is not getting too down on yourself if you don't reach what was a lofty goal that you set. Say, your goal is 5 or 6 leads a month, but you personally want to have your best month ever and hit 9 or 10. If you still hit 5 or 6, that's great. That, you're doing what's expected. And you don't have to get down about not reaching a lofty goal, basically. So just, being self-aware, being honest with yourself, keeping track of your goals, something else we talked about, definitely all factors in there.
That's a really good point, about like keeping track of things. Specifically, you mentioned the sort of cyclical nature of sales. Something that I did, and I'd love Alex and Scott for you guys to weigh in terms of like whether or not it was something you did as well. But I had a monthly goal as an SDR that I had to hit. And like you just mentioned, Scott, there were months where I felt like, oh, I could probably blow past this based on like how much pipeline I had built up, or based on like seasonality or whatever. Like if my goal was 6, I feel like I can get 10 this month. And there's like one thing to say about, hey, I tried to hit 10, I only got 8, but I still went past my goal, and like, good for me, kind of moving on from it from there. And there's another thing too, maybe I'm just crazy, but like documenting everything and month over month, like what was my goal? What was my manager's goal for me? What did I hit? And then seeing sort of like the upper and lower limits of what those looked like. And sort of, I guess, employing like the Goldilocks method and figuring out that sweet spot of like, if my manager thinks my goal should be this, but I'm realistically hitting that +2 every month, sometimes +6, sometimes -1, then I know like where my limits should be any given month. And that helps re-inform me of what my goal should look like. So that over time, while sales is doing this, I know for podcast listeners only, it's going to be really difficult to imagine what I'm doing here, but it's a sine wave. It's cyclical.
Like
you're still doing this. You're always kind of moving up and to the right so that you can, based on the fact that I'm wearing a sales hacker shirt that says up and to the right, you're constantly growing based on the limits that you've set for yourself. I think that's like super important to realize as an SDR that like, while you might not hit your goal, there are a bunch of different reasons as to what the case might be, but you'll never know unless you document it and you kind of dig into figuring out why that was the case. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm the only guy who spreadsheeted their goals like that. Alex and Scott, I don't know if you guys do that, but I know it did help me quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think at some point, like soon after I started at demandDrive, there was a sheet, like a Google sheet that people started using. So it was really, you just like make a new tab for the new month and all the old months are still there of all your like goals for that, like the leads you pass. So I don't think I did it individually before that, but once it was there, it was really helpful to be like, oh, this is when we started offering this new product, and look at how like my leads changed, and like this is when like this shift happened in the market, and like look at how they changed the other direction. So like being able to see those was really cool. It's not something that I set out to do on my own, but I am really glad that it's been worked into the system that we have.
Yeah, I existed pre-master whiteboard, I guess, as an SDR.
I did for a couple months there. It was just an actual whiteboard you tally up in the middle of the office.
Yeah, I would, agree with Alex here. So I've seen some of the absolute best SDRs that demandDrive has had. Like there's a few that come to mind in particular, like Lee Baker, Andrew Smith, like the way that those guys track pipeline and is, I'm envious of it because it's just like my brain doesn't really work that way. But once I saw how they were doing things, I was like, no wonder these guys are hitting goals every month and going above and beyond. So I think AJ, to your point, something that you said, in terms of, if you're, because it's cyclical, if you're having a down month, but then being able to go back to your pipeline and see if you had any good conversations from a month or two prior that asked you to then reach out now. And I think that's, a fantastic way to make sure that you're consistently hitting goal and you're avoiding the valleys in terms of your production.
Yeah, sort of like exhausting all of the resources at your disposal, right? Like there's if there are a certain like number of inputs that you can do to try and get an output, but every month you omit like a handful of those in terms of ways to get goal, but you're still hitting goal. And then all of a sudden there's a month where you're not tracking to hit goal. If you're not then looking at the things you don't typically do to try and hit goal, then there are still arrows in your quiver, right? Like you're not exhausting all of your resources. You're not being as, I guess, creative or resourceful as you could be. So it goes back to that like self-awareness stuff that you were talking about. Like if you know that you're kind of cheating yourself a little bit by not using everything at your disposal to hit a goal that you're not on pace for, then it's on you, right? Maybe the goal is attainable, just in that moment it's unattainable because you're not putting in as much as you possibly could be.
Definitely. And, I'm someone that I've always enjoyed like just trusting the process. You have this process, you have these emails, these, a call script to follow. But then if you get later in the month and, you're having a poor month, like that is the point at which it might be time to switch things up and try a more creative approach. The definition of insanity is just doing things over and over and expecting a different result. So if, to that point, if you're not seeing the success that you want, and you want to be honest with yourself about the goals you've set, try something new, try a new strategy, maybe switch up the times that you're making calls or sending emails. But, doing the same stuff, like I said, I like to trust the process and just, know that I'm doing good work on the back end in terms of my prospecting and account mapping and stuff like that. But then if the outreach isn't resonating, that's kind of when it becomes time to tweak things a little.
Didn't realize that you were a Philadelphia 76ers fan.
Sam Hinkie got a raw deal.
Well, Scott, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you providing some insight and examples into goal setting, what sort of an individual SDR or even someone who manages SDRs might be able to do to effectively set and hit goals on a regular basis. If there was one thing that you wanted the audience to leave this conversation with, what would that be?
I think the one thing, it's kind of like a two-part thing, but
so two things, but cool.
Yeah. Keep in mind that your goals are always fluid. You can change your goals as needed, in one way or the other. But another thing is starting small and working your way up to the bigger goals. Small victories. So, you're doing what's right. You're getting your stuff done. You're celebrating your small wins, and then that can lead to, your ultimate goal, your big win.
Love it. You heard it here first, folks. Small victories. Thanks again for being on the show, Scott. If people want to connect with you, learn more about this topic from you, just shoot the breeze with you, where can they get in touch?
Talk about their goals with you.
Talk about their goals
accountable with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is my name, Scott Bonish. So, I'm on LinkedIn on a pretty daily basis. My demandDrive email, also a good spot. I'm always there. Scott.Bonish@demandDrive.com.
I'll link both in the show notes for people so that they can actually get in touch with you. I think it'd be really cool. Yeah. If someone reached out to you and was like, hey, I would love to be more accountable towards my goals. Can you help? You've done it once before successfully already. So
yeah.
Cool.
Looking forward to it.
You heard it here first, folks. You can reach out to Scott anytime, day or night, 24/7. Thanks again for being on the show. This is, again, the Unsubscribe podcast. Remember to subscribe to Unsubscribe, get more tips and tricks in your inbox. And we'll see you next time. Thanks again for being here, Scott.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for watching this episode of Unsubscribe, the demandDrive podcast. If you want less of those nasty unsubscribe emails in your inbox, go ahead and check out some of the content we have to the left, and make sure that you subscribe to Unsubscribe to keep your SDR team in tip-top shape.